Hi all. It's Saturday morning, and I know I look like something the cat dragged in. I've been hauling gravel in the driveway all morning, and I'm all disheveled. But I wanted to respond to a couple of issues that came up in the forums so far this week and try to offer a little more specific advice. But first off, I want to say again how proud I am of most of you who are really approaching this project in good faith and really trying to get it right and really working at crafting your arguments. That makes me very happy because that speaks directly to the quality of scholars that you are developing into. And that is all I care about. All I care about is turning out good scholars, because it's my belief, and I could be wrong, and I'm an old man, but it's my belief that the primary reason for the problems we're having in our country is we've turned out a whole generation of people who can't think for themselves and who have no interest in learning how to think for themselves. And the corollary to that is, in my opinion, if we could turn out a generation who can actually think for themselves and then act upon those thoughts, it would transform this nation practically overnight. I continue to believe that, and it's what continues to keep me working in this business. But thinking for yourself is a thing that it's not a natural activity. The natural activity is to lay back and let somebody else do your thinking for you, and that's how come we're in the mess we're in. And I'm not talking about just the eggheads at Harvard and Yale who sit up there in their ivory towers and proclaim great thoughts. They have their effect and they have their place. But if we could get people like you and me, the citizens who are out there in the streets having discussions with our other fellow citizens, and in the restaurants and in the bars and in the theaters, having discussions with other citizens about important stuff, and actually thinking clearly and precisely and then expressing those thoughts, that would change the fabric of this nation. I'm convinced of it. But as long as thinking is the province of some other egghead sitting in a college office somewhere, and not that idea not filtering down to the citizens, not much is going to happen. And partially we academic intellectuals, we're partially responsible for that, because we sort of claimed critical thinking for ourselves, and like any other sort of mysterious discipline, like medicine, for instance, we like the idea of being able to say, well, only I can do this, and you must learn from me. Well, yeah, you need to learn from me how to do it and then do it for yourselves, but we don't quite take that step. We fail to teach that sometimes. So enough preaching. I wanted to address the two things. Well, really one thing, and that is paraphrasing. Remember, and I've seen some very, very good advice, at least as good as advice I could give from some of your colleagues. But the question always to ask yourself is, how does this serve my purpose? And whether you're going to paraphrase or whether you're going to quote. And the trick is, how much does this sound like me talking? The more it sounds like your voice, the more useful, the less intrusive quotes will be. They won't be like this, just something stuck in there. The less it sounds like you talking, the more important for the flow of your prose and your thoughts, the more important it is for you to paraphrase it and try to get it into your own words so that the ideas flow smoothly. If I'm talking along like this, and then all of a sudden I stick in something from Shakespeare, well, you'll notice that, right? But I might sneak a phrase or two in from Shakespeare or T.S. Eliot, as I just did in the forum, and I might phrase it in my own voice, and you wouldn't notice the disconnect. So the question is to ask, always, 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 you have to know what you think. If you haven't taken a position on your topic, you've got to do that. This thing is due in 6 days. You've got to take a position. You can't write on a topic, you have to write on a position. If you've taken your position, then the next question to ask when you're making those decisions is, how easily does this fit into my texture. You are in control of this paper, not me and not the quotes. So how easily and smoothly does this fit? If it fits fairly easily and smoothly and the quote is really good, then by all means use a quote. But if you're going along like this and your quote's up here and you just stick that quote in, your audience is going to do that and fall off. So if the quote is substantially different from your voice, then it's a good instinct to paraphrase. Change the words into your voice. Just be sure that you cite your source, because there's still somebody else's ideas, and you still have to cite the source, but you don't quote. Again, I'm assuming that you've all read the chapter in Wilhoit on documentation. If you haven't read the chapter, I don't know what to tell you. So in the determination of paraphrasing versus quoting, that's the question to ask. How well does this serve my purpose? And then how much does this sound like me? Right? If you're writing at college level diction, and most of you are, or in the neighborhood of college level diction, then you don't have to raise your diction level anymore. But if you got a quote that sounds like a doctoral dissertation from Harvard, that's not the level at which you are writing, nor are you expected to. So you'd want to paraphrase that and make sure it fits into your own diction. Your voice should be the voice that is heard in this piece, not anybody else's. The other voices exist to serve you. And I noticed, I forgot who it was, but somebody had a fairly long quote that had three things in it, three sort of different things in it. I mentioned this, I just forgotten who it was. And so you might just want to tease out the part that fits the paragraph you're writing, the piece of your argument that you're working on right now. What piece of that quote fits into your argument? You might have to tease out a line or two. And the second thing is, in terms of paraphrasing, if it's a long quote, like if it's 8 or 10 lines long, yes, you should make it into a block quote if you're gonna quote it. We're not going to be too worried about that. But if you want to know how to do a block quote, look it up. That's the absolutely correct way to do it. The other thing, if the quote is really, really long, then paraphrasing it might be a better way to go. Shortening it, fitting it into your texture, not yielding control of your paragraph to this quote, no matter how beautiful it is, but taking control of the quote and making it fit your texture. This is not hard to do. It just requires some discipline and some instinct and some training. No one's born knowing how to do this. You learn how to do it, and we think it's a valuable skill because we think it helps you succeed in college and in life. I believe that, or I wouldn't be here, believe me. So the other thing is, I noticed a couple of you that I wanted to respond. You've got a quote within a quote, and that can get very messy very quickly, and that's where I think paraphrasing really works. So if you got something like this, let's say you found this, you're reading Mary's book, and Mary has quoted from John in her book, and you really like John's quote, but it's in Mary's book. So you got Mary quoting John, and you're coming along, and you're going to quote Mary quoting John. That gets really complicated really easy, and my solution to these complex problems is, if you can figure out an easy way out of the problem, if you can write your way out of a problem, then you don't have to address it. If you can get a work around the problem, develop a technique for not having to deal with that. There's ways to deal with that, but you got to double quote, you have to double enter in your works cited page, and so forth and so on, and it gets really complicated. So the best way to do that, and again, for a couple of you that I responded to, it wasn't entirely clear to me, but it looked like you were quoting from somebody who was quoting somebody else. And so there are a couple ways to approach it. If you really like John's quote, and you just happen to have found John's quote in Mary's book, well, Mary probably will have a works cited page in which you can find the original source where John wrote that or said that. So one way to get out of that difficulty that's created by that double quoting is to use Mary's Works Cited page, find John's original source, and then quote that directly, sort of cutting out Mary as the kind of middleman altogether. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, and probably the easiest, if you've got this, say you got 4 lines and they're from Mary's book, but line 3 is a quote that Mary found in John's book, so you're quoting Mary, Mary's quoting John, and you're trying to work the whole thing in. Well, then paraphrase the Mary part instead of quoting directly from Mary, because you want to get to the quote by John, or you wouldn't have included it. So instead of quoting the whole thing from Mary, paraphrase Mary. Say, as Mary says in her book, blah, 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 or Mary in her book, blah, 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 quotes John, who says, blah, 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 and then insert John's quote, but cite it to Mary, because Mary's where you got it. You see, so your words would be, in her book, Isn't English Class So Much Fun You Can't Stand It? Mary quotes John, who says, and then you open quote, and then Mary opens quotes, or you open quotes, because you're paraphrasing Mary, so you haven't opened quotes yet. You open quotes and you stick John's quote in. Wow, I love documentation. I stay up all night long. I dream about it at night, period, in quotation marks. And then you go on and you make some comment about Mary's inclusion of that in her book, and then you cite to Mary, because Mary's where you got the quote, even though you're quoting John. I know that sounds complicated, but that's really the solution to the problem. If you find John and Mary, but you want to quote John, but you're getting John from Mary, then you have to cite Mary, unless you're going to go and cite both people, and you can do that. You can cite Mary's book as the original source, and then you got to find John's bibliographic information, which if Mary's a scholar of any kind, there will be a works cited page, and you've got to cite John and Mary as 2 sources, which gets really complicated, and there's easy ways out of it and around it. So I don't know if that made any sense to you or not, but use the noodle, use the little gray cells, as Poirot says, and think your way through these problems. If you think your way through them, a lot of it's common sense, and a lot of it will yield itself to an easier solution than going that crazy way around. Finally, I don't want you to get, I hope I haven't given you the impression that the most important thing is getting this stuff exactly right. There is a way to get it exactly right, and sometimes you will. But the discipline of getting it as right as you possibly can, not giving up until you're satisfied you've done your best, that's the skill I'm after. And turning out scholars of quality and citizens who can think, that's what I'm after, and everything else is secondary. The reason I don't want you to become overly obsessed with the MLA stuff right now is, guess what? The MLA is changing all the rules, and they're coming out with a new rule book in the fall, and they're changing stuff up, and I've looked at some of it, but some of my colleagues are all freaking out about this. Oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We have to start over, blah, 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 blah. And, one of the advantages of being somewhat advanced in age is I've been here before, and I've seen all this before. This is the 2nd or 3rd time the MLA has changed stuff up on us, and they just do it because they can, for the most part. So that's why I don't want you to get too obsessed about memorizing all this crap. It's in the book. Look it up. Get it right. Move on. Use the information that you need. It's like I wake up in the morning and I see, oh, it's going to rain today. I need to take an umbrella. Do I have to memorize that information? No. I have the information. I make my decision. I can dispense with the information because I've made my decision. Same thing with the MLA stuff. So there will be new MLA stuff coming out in the fall. It's out now, actually. And if you have another class that requires MLA, you're probably going to find some different stuff from what you've practiced this year in this class. So don't worry so much about whether it matches, next year's handbook. Just celebrate the discipline of getting it right. And I think you guys have been a remarkable class in terms of most of you are really working at this and really doing your best. I can sense it. At least 3/4 of this class is doing the very best you can, and that speaks volumes, and it makes me really proud of you and happy that things seem to be working. Sometimes they don't work, but in this case, for most of you, the stuff is working. So I need to shut up and go take a shower and get this up for you. I'm gonna start next week early. I don't know that I'll start it on Sunday, but I think I'm gonna start next week on Monday. So we're gonna overlap a little bit, because you've only got until Thursday at 5 o'clock to get all this stuff in, and I don't want to make you wait until Tuesday morning. So I think I'm going to start next week, if I can get it together, either on Sunday afternoon or Monday morning, but I'll send you an email and let you know. Basically next week going to be peer review and sharpening up, sort of working with all of you the best I can, and you working with each other and sharpening these things up the best we can. I've looked at all the stuff that you posted in the peer review. There's 5 or 6 of you who are in that peer review thing working, and I've been in there and I've made suggestions for those 5 or 6 people. Next week that'll be a required activity, and I will take the time to look at everybody's, at least at your introductory strategy and your thesis statement. So in case you have to make any kind of massive changes, you'll still have 4 or 5 days to do it. All right, shutting up now. Hope you're having fun. Bye.